All right, so today we are going to talk about the Pendle witches. Now, the 1612 trial of the Pendle witches is actually one of the most famous witch trials to occur in England. Now, the 12 people who were accused of being witches were accused of unaliving some people and a whole host of other mischievous things. But what makes this trial so great is that it's actually one of the most documented witch trials in history. Now, of those who went to trial, 9 women and 2 men, 10 were found guilty, and 1 was found not guilty. There was also another one who actually died in prison before the trial took place. Now, what's curious about this is that 6 of the women who were accused of witches all came from 2 different families. So, could have been a hit job. Let me know what you think about this story. Now, one of the accused had lived in the area for 50 years and she had always been thought of as a witch. And so this is what it says is that some of the deaths that the witches were accused of had happened many years before authorities started to take interest. And this particular event that happened in 1612 is what triggered an inquisition or inquiry into the deaths, which led to these people being accused of as witches. So this says, on her way to Charlton Forest, Dempke's granddaughter, Alison Device, encountered John Law, a peddler from Halifax, and asked him for some pens. Now, 17th century metal pens were handmade and relatively expensive, and they were frequently needed for magical purposes such as healing, particularly in treating warts. And they were also used for divination and for love magic, which may have been why Allison was so keen to get a hold of them and why Law was so reluctant to sell them to her. Now, whether she meant to buy them as she claimed and Law refused to undo his pact for such a small transaction, or whether she had no money and was begging for them as Law's son Abraham claimed, it was unclear, but according to 1613 tract Potts' Discovery of Witches, the devil appeared in the likeness of a black or brown dog with fiery eyes, which Jeanette Device later claimed was a spirit familiar of her grandmother named Ball. Now, the Black Dog spoke twice in English, offering to lame the man. A few minutes after the encounter, when Allison Device, she said she saw Law stumble and fall, apparently lame. Perhaps he had suffered a stroke in that moment, but he managed to regain his feet and reach a nearby inn. Initially, Law made no accusations against Allison, but she appears to have been convinced of her own powers when Abraham Law took her to visit his father a few days after the incident, and she reportedly confessed, asking for his forgiveness. Now, the Pendle witches were also tried along with a group known as the Samlesbury witches, excuse me, and this included a woman named Jane Southworth, Jeanette Brierly, and Ellen Brierly, and the charges against those women included child unalivings and cannibalism. Margaret Pearson, the so-called Paddingham witch, who was facing her 3rd trial for witchcraft, this time for killing a horse, and then Isabel Roby from Wendell, who is accused of witchcraft to cause sickness. Now, some of the accused Pendle witches, such as Allison Device, seem to have genuinely believed in their guilt, but others protested their innocence to the end, and Jeanette Preston was the first to be tried during this set of trials. Now, what's interesting to note is that in modern times, there have been several petitions to give clemency and pardon these women who were all executed for being witches. But ironically enough, for some reason, their convictions still stand according to the law. And there was even a petition filed with the Swiss government for Anna Goldie, who was beheaded in 1782. And she is actually thought to be the last person in Europe tried as a witch. But all of these people's convictions still stand, and none of them were pardoned. Now, it is interesting to note that when Queen Elizabeth took the throne, she actually ended up passing a law in the form of the Witchcraft Act of 1562. And this demanded the death penalty, but only where harm had been caused. Lesser offenses, were just punished by imprisonment. Now, the act provided that anyone who should use, practice, or exercise any witchcraft, enchantment, or charm or sorcery, whereby any person shall happen to be killed or destroyed, was guilty of a felony without benefit of clergy and was to immediately be put to death. Now, what's interesting is that Queen Elizabeth's successor, James I, also followed this up, particularly after an incident where an accused group of witches supposedly sent a storm to cause harm to a shipwreck or to a vessel, sorry, that him and his wife were traveling on during the time. And this group of women was called the North Berwick Witches, and this trial happened in 1590. So they were, convicted of using witchcraft to send a storm against the ship that carried James and his wife back to Scotland, which then caused James to write a book called Demonology, instructing his followers that they must denounce and prosecute any supporters or practitioners of witchcraft. So, what does this have to do with the 1612 trial of the Pendle Witches? Well, every justice of the peace in Lancashire at the time was ordered to compile a list of people who basically refused to attend the English church and take communion, which was a criminal offense at the time. Now, Roger Newell, who of Reed Hall, who was on the edge of Pendle Forest, was one of the people in charge of compiling this list. And it was against this that a background of seeking out religious nonconformists in 1612 started to be investigated by him, and a complaint was made by him of the family, by the family, a complaint was made to him by the family of John Law about this incident regarding John's father, Abraham, and everything that had happened, who said that he was injured by witchcraft. Now, many of those who subsequently became implicated by this investigation, or as the investigation progressed, had already considered themselves to be witches, with the exception of Allison. And that's because these women, as I've talked about before, were all village healers who practiced magic, healing, all of that stuff. And in return for payment, probably in return for payment, they would do, little favors and things for people like that. But the women and men in these rural areas usually accepted these people, as a part of normal life, because they did come in handy for a lot of things that were happening. Now, it's also interesting to note that the judges in charge of these trials couldn't really understand King James's issue with witchcraft, but they felt that they had no choice but to go along with it. But a lot of the convictions didn't actually sit right with them, because of the subject matter at hand. Some of them did consider it a miscarriage of justice, and sentencing a woman to death by hanging for witchcraft was just not something that they were used to, especially when these judges were from small rural towns and they knew the benefits of the healers in the area. And since King James had made a case for suspending the normal rules of evidence for these witchcraft trials, it did lead to a lot of corruption and possibility of people giving false accusations just for the sake of, trying to get someone out the way, which we know happens a lot when it comes to witch trial. Now, the case that started all of this with Allison Device, whose encounter with John Law had triggered basically all of this. Her case was unique. Allison was confronted in court by her alleged victim, John Law, and since she genuinely believed that she had done something wrong and was guilty, she actually fell to her knees and confessed to being a witch, and she was found guilty. Now, what's sad about Allison's case is the fact that she may have been coerced or just honestly felt bad because maybe she did come from a family of witches. If her grandmother was, suspected of being a witch in town for nearly 50 years, it's possible that her grandmother was a healer and did practice some magic. And Allison, being young and naive, possibly believed that she had done something wrong. I don't think that she did, but it is unfortunate that she was found guilty because of, I'm just going to say, an old man's bad health. But let me know what you guys think about this particular video. And yeah, it's just sad that this had to happen. And I'll have more witch trial videos coming this week as well. Bye.